And I'm just gonna walk you through a little bit of the Canvas website. I'm not completely done, just to let you know. I'm trying to be better about this. Sorry about that. So this is the Waterslide Decal page. The pictures are not changed yet, but I just wanted to let you know that I did get at least the materials on there. So all the materials for the Waterslide Decal process are all accurate here. I shared like the inkjet printer that I use, if anybody's interested in purchasing that. I share the different Waterslide decal papers that are available. I typically use Lasertran, except for Lasertran is becoming less and less available. So what I found is this other brand, Sunny Scopa, and also A4. These seem to be accessible and so available on Amazon. I'm not sure how people feel about that in the class, but I know that they have it on Amazon, and it's a relatively cheap, about $1 a sheet. Not bad considering. I think the Lasertran is almost like $1.50, $2 a sheet. And then there's this other brand, I don't know if it's called A4, but it's the biggest. It's a bad design on the front. So A4 is the size of the paper, but there isn't a label for any kind of company or anything. Inkjet Waterslide decal paper. This is a different one. It's a little bit cheaper, but I tried it and I didn't like the quality as much as the one that I just showed you prior. So this one I feel like works a little bit better. It's like $3 or $4 more, but if you end up really liking this process, I suggest that one over the other. Lasertran has its own website. It's a company, I think they're from the UK, so it's not a US company, which is probably explaining why it's hard to get some of the materials over here. But yeah, Lasertran is the original paper that I would buy. You can see here, it's not that much more expensive, but it's currently out of stock. The process is going to require a clear varnish. And so I'm showing you this varnish as the like the general use. And so the varnish on top of the paper, you actually spray it on top of the paper when you're done printing on it, is to help protect the image that's on the paper. And so I would say a good general varnish would be like an acrylic spray paint, but I am going to be using the process on wood today. And so one of the things that I like to do, and this is just from my own personal tests, and so this is also a process I've been doing for about 10 years. I use shellac or I use polyurethane. I think it really depends on what kind of material you're actually going to put the image on, right? And so if you're going to put the image, the Waterslide decal process works almost on any material that's smooth. It could be on candles, mugs. That's what it's typically used for. It's very kitschy, but I love to put it on metal and wood and plastic and these other materials that show through. And so the other thing that I should mention too is that the process that we'll use today, the white of the paper actually goes clear. So the surface of the image, the surface of the material that you're using will actually come through the image and becomes the white parts of the image. And then I put also like a link for trays. We'll be using a tray today to slide the image onto the surface. That's what also releases the image from the paper. It doesn't need to be a fancy tray like this. It could just be anything that holds water. It could be in your sink or a bathtub. And then I also included the link just for some foam brushes. And these are the brushes that I get. The materials are there, and then I'll go step by step over that today. So I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start with the image preparation. And as I open my demo folder, something that I'd like to show just so that we have a little bit of clarity too on the different processes. You'll see how I label them down here, but this image is the original, and my grandma just turned 90 on Tuesday, and so I've been thinking about her a lot. I always think about her a lot, so I'm using her as my demo image. But this is the original image. It's a photo probably from like the 1940-ish, so it has a brownish tone. It's an image that I scanned, and then as I go through the different demonstrations, I prepare my image differently. So this is a cyanotype image. I've inverted it so that it's a negative because the process requires that. We did chart pack a couple of weeks ago. So if you notice, it's actually reversed. So my grandmother appears on the right side, where in the original, she appears on the left side. And that's because the chart pack process, again, requires you to place the image straight directly to the paper. And then today we're gonna be doing water slide. So if you notice, it's actually not that much different from the original image. My grandma is on the left, just like the original image, except that I just removed the color. Know that this process actually does allow color or black and white images. I could have actually even left that brownish tone. But again, I know that I'm going to be using wood today. So I decided that I wanted to remove that brown because I knew I was going to get the brown from the wood. I'm just going to walk you through the process that I used to prepare this image. And so this is my original image. The first thing that I'm going to do is change the size. You will need to measure the object that you're planning to put the image on. There is no changing the image. There is cropping the image and making it smaller, like physically cutting it. But if you want to make sure you get the whole image inside whatever frame or surface that you're using, you want to make sure you change the image size. So I'm going to go to image, down to image size. And the first thing I want to do is, so I measured my wood and it's 4 by 6. I cut a 4 by 6 piece of plywood, excuse me. So under width, because my image is vertical, I'm going to go to 4. And I have it set to constrained proportions right now. So if you notice, it's 4 by 5.382. So that means the image itself is not going to be long enough. So the width is good, but it's not going to be long enough. So instead of going by width, I'm going to go by height instead. This is going to make sure that I have the height of my image, except for that I'm going to have to trim a tiny bit off the width. Now that I have the correct dimensions, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Like I said, I want to get rid of this brown because I feel like I'm going to use the brown from the wood. So there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You could do image mode and then grayscale, but I like to use the adjustment layers over here. So I'm going to just go ahead and click the black and white adjustment layer. And what that does is it adds an adjustment layer to your image so it doesn't change the actual image itself, right? And the reason why I like the adjustment layer is because it actually gives you much more flexibility to change the contrast of your image. You can see the most change happening with the red toggle if you're working in black and white. And then what I'm looking for in terms of contrast, so this is a little more middle gray, right? You can still see the image. There's something interesting going on with like the age of it. And I would say like if I was doing a normal like black and white image, I'd be like maybe around here a little bit brighter. But because I want to make sure the gold, like the brown gold color of my wood shines through, I'm going to like be a little bit more on the brighter side. And this will really depend on the material, right? And so that's why I want to talk a little bit more about how we prepare our images. This is a little bit brighter. I'm losing some information here on his shoulder, but that is less important to me than like the color of the wood shining through. I could go through in here and do a little bit of burning if I wanted to. I think I'm okay with that. And so I'm gonna go ahead and save, file save. So if you notice here under my Waterslide Decal, it's already saved as a JPEG. If I want to go in, a JPEG means it's a completely closed file. The file is done. You could edit it and resave it. But if you want a working file so that you could come back in and change it, like let's say, for example, this is the first time I printed this image and I don't know if it's actually going to look good or not, I would save it as a PSD. So after you do the transfer, and then you realize like, hey, you know, this isn't like the contrast doesn't look good, or maybe the wood is darker than you thought, you could come back into that same file and change it. And then the last thing I'm going to do is print, right? So I'm going to go to File, let's see, File, Print, and I'm going to set up my computer. So my printer is the Canon 110 series, and then I'm going to go into printer settings, and for this specific paper I'm using not the laser tran but the Sunny Popa, I think is the name. It's a little bit on the shining side, so under quality and media. And the settings might be a little bit different depending on what printer you're using. Under media type, it gives different types of paper. So under photo paper, I'm gonna select glossy for this specific type of paper. When I use laser tran, I hit matte because it has a matte chalky surface. And I'll actually, after this image comes out of the printer, I'll show you the two. I don't know if it'll be as clear virtually, but yeah, the laser tran is definitely more matte than the paper that we're using today. I also like to, for print quality, I print on high. It just prints it a little bit slower, which I feel like allows the ink to soak in a little bit more. So like these water decal papers are a little bit more porous, and I think it's because the nature of them being submerged in water. And then I'm gonna go ahead and hit print. So this was the one that I was talking about that I use. It's called Laser Tran. And Laser Tran has a little bit more of a chalky. So this is the Laser Tran, and this is the other one. And I don't know if you can tell, but this one's the one that's a little bit more chalky. You could let me know. I find that the Sunny Copa is a little bit more clearer. Because the chalkiness of the Laser Tran, I notice here in the eyes a little bit that the ink bleeds a little bit. And so I see a sharpness in this ink Waterslide Decal paper. So this is the one that I'm using today. And this is the one that I'm suggesting to you. I believe it was the one that was $18.39 on Amazon, 20 sheets. So a little under $1 each sheet. Again, this is also the size of my wood. So the reason why it's this specific size is because it's the size of my wood. And something that I might suggest, because the paper is not cheap, I didn't do it today, but I could have fit 2 images if I had printed it this way, right? And so I think for the purposes of the demo, I was kind of just moving fast. But if you buy this paper yourself, my suggestion is if you could take up as much of the 8.5 by 11 space of the paper, that would be like, just like more effective and cheaper and stuff. Something that I would mention is that the transfer paper, excuse me, I need water. There is print, like there's words on the back of it. So you'll have to make sure that you know which way the paper needs to face when you're printing. So my printer feeds pretty automatically. And so I put the white side up and it prints. Sometimes people have printers where it like flips the paper. So you just want to make sure that this print ends up on the back, right? With the Laser Tran paper, it doesn't have words, but it's a slightly blue. So I wanted to show you, these are all the materials that I'm using. I have the acrylic spray here. The shellac that the link to the shellac that I sent you was a spray can, but I do it so much that I actually just use a normal can. The pint-sized can is about $10 to $12, depending on where you go. A gallon is about 20. And again, I do these fairly large, which is why I like to buy the gallon size. I have my foam brushes. I have my mixing stick. I have some uncoated wood. So this wood is just bare. This is if you came a little bit later to pick up your box, these pieces of wood are included. If not, I could send them to you if you want to pick them up. But these are uncoated. And in preparation for the demo, I already had coated a piece of wood. And so if you want to do wood with this process, you also have to finish the piece of wood that you're going to be applying the image on. I did it to both sides just to keep it nice. And again, this is a piece of plywood. It's a simple piece of plywood. And then just to give an alternative, I brought a piece of plexiglass out. So I'm going to transfer one of the images to the plexiglass. I have a scissor. And then also what I included in the box is a puppy pee pad. And so I usually work on a puppy pee pad just in case I have a spill. These are fresh from the printer. And what you want to do first is make sure that you cover them with the varnish, right? And so for that, what I have is a piece of cardboard. So I'm actually going to put that on my work surface first. I have the crystal clear varnish.
right here. And when you use it, you want to make sure that you shake it. And then when you spray, you want to be at least a foot away. So I'm going to move one of these away temporarily. Put this one here, shaking. And I'm about a foot away, and I'm going to just do sweeps, just like this. So I'm not going to hit it really hard in one spot. And I would probably wait like 2 to 3 minutes before you do a second coat, but I like to do a double coat on all of my images just to make sure that it's good. And so that's going to dry. I'll put it off here to the side. And then I have my laser tran version, and I just want to show you like if you prefer not to use a spray can, typically you want to make sure that it's nice and mixed up. I mixed it up not that long ago, but I'll do it one more time. So again, this is the shellac in a can. Also, this cuts down on like aerosol cans. And then I have my foam brush. Make sure that it's soaked. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm kind of squishing the brush. I know you can see it, squishing the brush on the side so that the brush is not totally completely soaked, because the goal is to get the thinnest coat possible, right? And so we don't want this to be soaking, because if it's totally saturated, it's going to take forever to dry. That's one of the benefits of the spray bottle. But like I said, if you're doing this a lot, or if you're doing it in a large size, I think it's a lot cheaper to do the shellac. So here you could really notice that it brings a shine. It's more noticeable, I think, on the laser tran because it's so matte. You can see the color difference. But I'm going to go ahead, go all the way through, cover the whole photo. Also with the laser tran, I try to use the least amount of brush strokes possible on the first pass, because depending on how long the image has dried, it could smear the ink. So I actually suggest that if you print it the day before, then that gives it adequate time to dry. If you're in a little bit of a rush, usually I am, I use a hair dryer. So I'll hit these pieces of paper with a hair dryer before I put the varnish on it. And then on my second pass, which I'm not going to do because it's wet, I usually go in the opposite direction just to make sure that I don't get vertical streaks when I'm using the brush. Okay, and so I did the spray, I did the brush version. I'm going to put things back over here on my puppy pee pad. And then just like a cooking show, I have some that are already dry. And so I'm going to put these to the side. And these ones that are already dry, I'll hold them up a little bit closer. You could tell this one is the one with the shellac because it has a little bit of a yellow color to it. And so sometimes when I do the demo, people are turned off by this yellow color. It's not as obvious when it actually transfers to the wood. And then this is just the spray, which has, it looks almost like nothing's on it or anything like that. And when I let things dry, I usually let them dry flat, so it doesn't have like a run in it. So usually when I do the shellac, and I've seen people tilt their surfaces like towards the sun or something to dry, it usually leaves like a dripping kind of like look. But that could also be stylistic if anybody's interested in that. Cool, so let's go ahead and do the transfer process. I'm going to use the version that has the shellac because I know that I'm transferring to wood for the first time. So what I have is my piece of wood. I have my tray, right? I'm going to go ahead and pour some water in it. And this water, there's nothing in the tray. It's just like a little bit dirty because I use it for lots of different things. The water that I'm using right now is a little bit warm. And so I would say if you're working in an area that's cold, or just in general, having the water a little bit more warm on the warm side is going to let the paper release from the backing faster and smoother. By that, I mean that there is like this backing, right, with the words. There's kind of like this jelly surface on top of that paper that lifts up. And so if you imagine, it's kind of like, it actually feels kind of like Jello, like the gelatin of Jello. But before I put this in the water, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and trim it. My wood has a 3/4 of a width. It's 3/4 width wide. And so what I want to do is leave a little bit of space around my image, right? So that I could wrap it around the wood. So I'm cutting this. And the varnish is even on my border. So when I brush the varnish, or when I brush the shellac on my image, I actually go past the image. And then also, just from experience, because I'm working with a rectangle that's 3-dimensional, I'm gonna go ahead and cut off these corners so that when I fold them over, I don't have a hard time. So this is just from experience too. Okay, so I'm gonna bring my water back. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna submerge it, but if you notice, when I submerge it, I'm gonna keep my fingers on the paper so that it doesn't curl in. Usually if you put it in right away, the paper will start to curl in on itself. I don't want that to happen. You could already see that it's like starting to lift from this paper, right? It's very cool. So have it in the water. Again, this is the wood that's been treated. So this wood is not porous anymore. It's got a varnish on it. I'm gonna put a little bit of water on the surface. You need to put water on the surface of the image that you are transferring. That's what's gonna help it slide. So if it's dry, it's not gonna be able to slide, and then it's gonna make it a really hard process for you to move the image. Okay, so, well, my image actually like floated off my paper. So my water might be too warm actually. So I'm gonna put the image with the backing on top of the wood. So the image is still on the paper and the wood is underneath. I'm going to use my finger to hold the surface of the image down, but I'm gonna use my opposite hand to pull the paper out from underneath. So here we go. Very cool, right? And so now what I have left to do is kind of to just smooth the image over and just make sure that it goes all the way across the wood. It was curling up just slightly. Let me put this back in the water. If you have a sponge, that would be ideal. If you don't, I just use my finger. So I'm not touching the surface really hard. I'm literally just trying to get any air bubbles out from under. The reason why I slide the paper, I've seen people try to pick the image up and transfer it, but that creates a lot of air bubbles, which could be, I guess, a stylistic effect as well. But yeah, what I try to do is smooth out all the air bubbles. And then because this is a 3-dimensional surface, I push also down around the sides. Okay. And then what you may find as the image dries is that it goes a little bit white, and some transfer processes might look a little bit different than others, but I know when I use laser tran, it looks a little bit white as it dries. Sometimes it even bubbles up slightly. My suggestion to you is to not touch it until it's completely dry. So sometimes air bubbles do pop up, but I've also noticed that they reduce back down to its flat state without touching it. And so if you keep touching it, then you start to get fingerprints and stuff on the surface of your image. Just let it dry and then put another coat of shellac on top of it once the surface is dry. But that's the laser tran, the Waterslide Decal process. And then I think I'm gonna go ahead and use the second example on the piece of plastic, just so you can see a different type of material. For my second one, I'm gonna use this like clear piece of plexi. So I'm gonna take off the wrapping first. This is a little bit bigger than my image, so it's not gonna fit straight to the edge, but I just grabbed this really quick for an example. And then I have my image that's coated with the clear varnish, cutting around. There's my paper, my tray in. So again, I'm gonna submerge, keeping my fingers on the surface of the paper so it doesn't curl in. So if you could see here, I could like move it back and forth with my thumbs. So it's literally like existing on the surface of that paper, right? I'm gonna make sure I don't have anything on the surface of my plexi. It's clean and smooth. I usually pick it up from one side and let it come out of the water like that so that it doesn't create any air bubbles, right? If you were to just grab it out like that, you might have like an air bubble in the center. So I'm gonna pick it up from one side. I'm gonna place it on my plexi. With my left hand, I'm gonna hold the image down, and with my right hand, I'm gonna pull the paper out from underneath it. Right? And now I have a version of the image that's clear. Very cool, right? So here's my 2 examples. And this is kind of cool because now when the image is clear, you could think about like, you know, what do I want to do with this background? How do I play with that more? And how can I have multiple images? But even that looks pretty cool, right? So yeah, that is the Waterslide Decal transfer process. So I'm going to put these here on the side.
I was going to take you to my website really quick because I did use this process pretty exclusively. Like almost 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of stuff on wood. And so I was just going to show you a couple more examples. This is my website, and under projects, I have examples of this woodwork down at the bottom under exposition. But yeah, this is that exact same process. These panels are, I think this one was like 10 by 10 each panel. But yeah, if you go through, really exploring, this is like early work, but it's all flat at the beginning, and then I start to kind of build out into like different shapes eventually. But yeah, go ahead and check that out. I think it's like it's a interesting process.